It was Hurricane 5, yeah, because we weren't naming them yet. But yeah, that was not only just one of the worst that year, but if you look at the list of some of the deadliest storms on record, if I'm remembering correctly, I want to say this was about number 10 on the list. So even by today's standards, this is one of the deadliest storms. You know, there was very limited ability to predict hurricanes back then. We kind of take for granted today. We have computer models, we have satellites. There are so many tools, advanced tools at our disposal. I mean, there were no supercomputers back then. There was very limited radio even in the 1800s. You know, in the early days of hurricane forecasting, forecasters would rely on radio reports from ships, but back in the 1800s, that wasn't even really available. What they would do is they would observe things like the swell on the water. So if they observed a very large swell coming in off the east, or wind or cloud patterns moving in unusual directions, that would kind of tip forecasters off that something was up. And they would also get telegraph reports from remote weather reporting stations to give them things like pressure, changes in temperature. But it was so limited that while they may know that a storm was approaching, there was really no way to know how big the storm was going to be, how strong it was going to be, how destructive it could potentially be. So, we talk today about sometimes very limited warnings for tornadoes. Back then, hurricanes could come out of nowhere and hit within hours of warning. We have so much more information about hurricanes now than we did back then. And looking at the history of numerous storm tracks, even since then, this was a very rare kind of a track. We don't have as much information about this as we would with a hurricane today, because we have so much more information and our ability to observe these storms is so much more advanced. But what we do know is it developed as a tropical storm near the Lesser Antilles. It passed to the north of those islands, eventually becoming a Category 1 storm after it passed the Dominican Republic and to the Bahamas. And then off the coast of Florida, ramped up to Category 2. Maximum winds were around 105 miles per hour as it turned almost due west into Savannah, or just to the south of Savannah. Winds were measured at about 80 miles per hour with an anemometer that then was destroyed. So that was the highest that was recorded, but the winds were estimated to be at about 100 or so miles per hour when it made landfall. The hardest hit areas were the barrier islands of Georgia. I'm sure there were some impacts, probably significant impacts in Hilton Head, but this was actually nicknamed the Georgia Hurricane of 1881 because that's where most of the damage took place. So Tybee Island down to St. Simon's Island, of course it made landfall on Ossabaw Island, Jekyll Island. Those were some of the hardest hit areas, especially since this came in during high tide. So it brought the worst storm surge impacts that it could have produced. So there was a lot of that. And then it moved inland, even as a Category 1 storm, as it was moving inland. So there was a lot of inland damage as well. A lot of rain, a lot of wind damage, and over 300 deaths, I believe, in the Savannah area. And storm total deaths were about 700. It was one of the deadliest storms on record.